bad popular science is about creating an illusion of knowing, whereas good popular science is about getting rid of the illusion of knowing. Greetings, this is Eugene the Philosopher, the greatest living philosopher after the unfortunate passing of Quentin Robert de Nameland, who has been the greatest living philosopher before me. In this video I wish to address the issue, or the topic at least, of popular science, like popularization of science, scientific journalism, and things like that. So obviously, like if you watched my previous video about science, like sociology of science, etc., like pseudoscience and scientific pyramids, I'll link them all in the description, or the cult of Einstein and Hawking, or many others, such as Two Faces of Scientific Communication, blah, blah, blah. You know that I'm pretty skeptical about the scientific journalism and, like, again, popularization of science in the first place, because, again, it basically serves the authority, right? Today's authority is science, like yesterday's authority was religion. Religion had its own version of proselytism, if that's how you stress this word in English, where you have the light of God, you know, the light of truth imposed on you by God, by the Holy Scripture or whatever, and you try to educate the dark masses, you know, bring this light to them. You have your enemies, like the heretics or devil worshippers and whatnot, and you have the completely analogous picture in the world of science. I mean, specifically popular science. You have the scientific gurus who gave you the scientific authorities, whatever they are at the moment, who give you sort of the Holy Scripture, what science says, which you assume to be the, again, almost like the divine knowledge, which you then spread to the dark masses, like dark uneducated sheeple or whatever, cattle, and you bring them to the, you know, how do they say it? I don't know the proper biblical term. Whatever, you bring the light to them, right? And you also have heretics like pseudoscientists, religious fanatics, etc., all these anti-scientific guys, right? And you fight against them. So, complete analogy here, right? And thus, we have basically popularizers of science is like this, turned themselves into a sect of, you know, Dawkins witnesses or something like that. To a degree, I've borrowed this idea that I'm gonna make the main point of this video from Victor Wachstein, who is one of the best, I would say actually the best sociologists in Russia currently. I haven't seen any videos of his in English, so I unfortunately cannot link any. Maybe I'll link some in Russian just for you to, like, see who it is in the first place. But he's a really cool guy. Like, I really enjoy listening to him. Anyway, so we've had this introduction of, you know, my quarrel with popularization of science, but yeah, but the main point is actually a little bit different of what I'm going to be talking about in this video. So, and alright, I'll probably repeat it several times over the course of this video, but roughly speaking, what is current popularization of science does, like this, you know, religious version of it. So what it's doing is, again, it's proselytizing, right? It's giving the dark uneducated masses as some sort of a, you know, processed food of knowledge, right? Or at least the illusion thereof, which we'll talk about a little bit later, by essentially simplifying scientific concepts, firstly, and secondly, like removing the internal inherent doubt that any scientific concept actually has. Again, my video, Two Faces of Scientific Communication, was exactly about that, like how scientific journalist frames the message in a very different manner with respect to the scientist who is actually talking to scientists, right? The scientist addressing scientists is delivering the message in a very different manner with respect to, let's say, journalist delivering it to the public. like the message was inspired by the same study, by the same research, but the message itself is very different. So watch that video if you wish to know more details. But so this is a bad example, what I've just gave you, like firstly simplification, and secondly removing of doubt, if you wish. Like these are two main problems that are at least visible on the surface. There are probably many others, right? And I have to confess that I myself have been a bad example of exactly this sort way too many times, not only like in the alternative science communities, but I've also given some talks at like more academic style venues, like here in Belarus specifically, but not only, where I talked about, like, you know, was trying to educate the dark masses, of course, with all the irony included. All right, I mean, in this statement. So yeah, I've been a bad example way too many times, and I am definitely slightly, at least to a very small part, but I'm still responsible for this problem, for its existence, right? I didn't create this problem in the first place, but I actually contributed to it at the very least, right? You might say I'm responsible, but maybe not guilty, right? But I'm still responsible. That's the quote, by the way, from it's actually like pretty hard to see where the origins of this quote is, but a pretty famous case, and that's a side rant, by the way, incoming. So a pretty famous case of this quote being used, like responsible but not guilty, was by Georgina Dufoy, some French politician who was the head of like the Ministry of Social something, like social welfare or something like that, basically, which included medicine, at least, you know, by some proxy. So the problem was that she was like operating some sort of blood transfusion facilities, and by neglect or by not knowing, God knows how, some of this blood got HIV infected, and therefore some of the people who got blood transfusions from this blood bank or whatever also got HIV from this. And there was like a court thingy proceeding after that. But she herself said that, yes, I am responsible, but I'm not guilty. Like, I didn't do it deliberately, right? Et cetera, et cetera. And actually, it's a pretty interesting case. She said that in 1991, I think, in some interview. And in 1999, there was like the actual court proceeded with her as the, I don't know the proper terms for these. I'm sorry. With her involved, let's say, in the court, and they've actually invited a French philosopher, Paul Ricoeur, a pretty famous guy, to testify there. And he also like commented on this quote of hers, like responsible but not guilty, and like actually wrote a whole book afterwards, following that, like just thinking about responsibility, right? Like that was a pretty interesting case. They've been like the accusations were lifted eventually, so they were freed. This woman and some other people who were also probably responsible but not guilty. This quote definitely was used by Abraham Heschel, who died in 1971, I think. So it was used much earlier, right? So she's not the author, definitely. But it's a very interesting quote, right? So yeah, I've been responsible as well for bad popularization of science. But I can't really give you good examples. Like I'm gonna transfer to that very soon. Like I've given you the description of what is bad popular science is, but I can't really give you examples of what the good is. Maybe Pierre-Marie Robitaille, actually, like when I think about his channel Sky Scholar, I'll link it in the description because why not? I mean, he has theories of his own, but at least he does things differently other than these other popularizers of science. And again, I'm gonna clarify it now, how exactly different. So what I think, and again, I follow Wachstein and I completely agree with him, what actual popularization of science, a good popularization of science, if you wish, should look like is to actually make obvious things less obvious, all right? So to bring science into trivial things, not necessarily, but, well, since it's a popularization, we're not talking about science per se, like in its own small realm, but when we're talking about, you know, in the interaction of scientists with the broader public. So trivial subjects are the best for that because they are known to everyone, right? Or at least everyone can have some proxy experience of them, right? Some sort of vicarious experience, if you wish. So bring science into trivial problems, again in air quotes, and explore them to new depths, which is actually curious because this is usually the problem of philosophy, right? This is what philosophy does. It sort of making problems out of thin air, if you wish, right? And problematizes existence to such a degree that even the most well understood, simplest thing is becoming a problem in philosophy, right? Like, what is this? Like, let's examine this thing, right? So this is what philosophy does, and philosophy to a degree. Yeah, so in this respect, popular science should not be the science, but rather should be something like philosophy. But obviously it should utilize some of the tools of science, at the very least. All right? And actually, to redeem myself a little bit, I should note that, like, I've not only popularized, like, in this bad way, like, regular academic science, I've also popularized alternative science or pseudoscience, if you wish, right? On Thunderbolt's Project YouTube channel, and some other places, like my own blog in Russian and vk.com network. So yeah, and I think that popularizing pseudoscience, even by methods of popularization of like mainstream science, academic science, is not a bad start, even though it's kind of bad because it has all the same flaws. But at the very least, the coexistence of these two things, popularization of mainstream and popularization of pseudo, their coexistence actually is very helpful for the well, let's say it's more beneficial to the society and to science in particular as a whole, for those two to be existing rather than just one, right? That's what I'm saying. So yeah, it's not a bad thing inherently. It shows you the possibility of a different interpretations of the same things, and therefore from this some doubts may arise, like, hey, wait a minute, maybe everything is not as simple as we thought, right? Maybe we shouldn't, like, just outright simplify everything to such a degree as we do when we popularize science usually, right? There exists a different model, and well, it's actually quite interesting, right? Let's figure it out. Let's try to learn more, right? It's always a good thing when people try to learn something new about the world, etc., etc. But of course, again, it has all the blunders of the usual popularizations of science, like it inherently creates a flock of idiots just blindly following you, like they were blindly following mainstream, now they blindly following you, just by the same power mechanism. It's just like they've switched their authority from one to the other, right? Like their modus operandi, the way they practice their cognition, I don't know, perception of the world, like conceptualization of the world hasn't changed fundamentally. Only the power structure changed from one to the other. Okay. Yeah. And what else? Okay, yeah. So the general point, which I've already made, but I'm gonna repeat, is that not turning the world into sort of black and white, you know, oversimplifying the world, as again popularizers of science are inherently doing, almost by design, you might say, and not showing how science explained some complex things which people don't really care about, but rather explaining, like applying science to simple things and showing how complex they actually are. This is what, like, the good popularization of science should be, in my opinion, at the very least. All right. Ultimately is to make people stop understanding even the simplest things, rather than giving them an illusion that they do understand complex things with your overly simplified explanation, right, that you brought to these dark masses again, right? So, well, why would you ever wish to make people stop understanding something? Well, it's because then it would inspire their curiosity, incite their curiosity, right? It may make them appreciate how complex the world is and start learning on their own, right? That's ultimately what, like, the goal of popularization of science is to draw people towards science, therefore make them at least a little bit scientifically minded, right? And for that, obviously, you need some sort of inspiration, some sort of drive, some sort of, you know, desire to learn. So if you unlearn what they know, well, they would want to learn what it actually is, whatever they've unlearned. Like, what's this thing really is about, right? Like, we thought it's one thing, but it's actually wrong. But what is it then, right? So that's what the science comes from, where the science comes from this question. Like, what is this thing about? How does it work? What is it connected to? Like, how important it is? How can we use it, etc., etc.? All these questions. Yeah, and regarding that, Wachstein actually gives like an example, like an anecdote, a legend, if you wish, from like Jewish history. And again, I'm super skeptical about like ancient history and the datings and stuff, but as an anecdote, we don't really care whether that happened actually or not, right? It may have happened like 2,000 years after the assumed date was, right? And it wouldn't actually change anything with regards to this particular anecdote anyway. So there are like two different schools of thought, if you wish, in Judaism, or I mean, there are probably many more, but in this anecdote only involves two. So it's Hillel and Shammai, and I'll give a link to some wiki articles so you can learn more if you wish. So Hillel is kind of a light version. It's sort of like this bad popularization of science version, like which kind of evolved into Christianity and things like that, or supposedly did. And Shammai is more hardcore, you know, like the very secluded, like super almost occult version, right? So the anecdote states that there was a guy who went to both of these sages, Hillel and Shammai, and asked them, each one of them. So he went to Hillel and asked Hillel, like, hey, can you actually explain to me what Torah is about while I'm standing on one leg? So basically, you know, very briefly. And Hillel said, well, don't do to the others what you don't to be done to yourself, right? Like, you know, like the golden rule thing. And everything else is like just comments and interpretations on that. This is the main idea of the book. And the guy said, oh, okay, goodbye. And the friends of Hillel said, wait, you've actually like significantly simplified, you know, the whole book. And actually, you kind of lied, you know, it's not what the book is about. But he said, well, I did no harm, you know, it's a decent sort of compactification of the sense of the meaning of the book. And so maybe this person would actually take interest in the book after that. Maybe he would say, well, that's a sound idea, maybe I should read it, right? But in reality, actually, well, I'll save the comment for like a minute later. And when the same guy went to Shammai and asked him, like, hey, can you explain to me Torah while I'm standing on one leg? Shammai actually took a stick and hit him on the head with it and said, you know, go away, go read some books and stop asking stupid questions. So this is kind of an entrance to a good popular science, you know, in my estimation and Wachstein's estimation as well. It's like the, you know, good popular science starts with a hit on the head with a stick. I would say. Yeah. So what Hillel did is basically given this person a surrogate of knowledge instead of actual knowledge, right? They've actually like, yeah, so some simulacrum, you know, something like again, like a processed food, like something not real, instead of something like genuine, which is the point of the book itself, right? And yeah, it's a good analogy to like popularization of science in the first place. Like, simply explaining complex things is Hillel's approach, and it's a bad approach. Whereas like telling a person that they don't know anything, even about the simplest stuff, is like a good popular science approach, I think. Because again, at the very least, it sparks curiosity. Like, it assumes there are depths to the world, which they are actually, right? The world is infinitely deep, even with our super limited perception of it. So to sum up this video and the main point that I've made, bad popular science is about creating an illusion of knowing, whereas good popular science is about getting rid of the illusion of knowing. And I think again, like this, like manufacturing of this surrogate knowledge is like the worst sin of the popular science, right? Where, like again, I can return to the point of doubt, like where scientists themselves are not sure that what they're saying is true, but at the level of journalism, this doubt completely vanishes, right? And this is really horrible, actually. Yeah. And good popular science, like, it should doubt everything, right? And like, exactly this doubt of even the simplest things that we can see all around us, right? Like, why do trees don't grow infinitely large, for example? That's a good question for our popular science to explain. It was completely off the top of my head, like, I didn't prepare any explanation. So, yeah. I mean, I can, like, half intuitively, like, think of a couple maybe, but I won't. Anyway, yeah, I'll probably just give you a couple more quotes, to finish this. So, again, returning to the main point that bad popular science is about giving you an illusion of knowing. So, Nietzsche said, again, in Human All Too Human, aphorism number 483, if you wish to check it out yourself. Again, the method of Shammai, go and read some books. So Nietzsche said that convictions are more dangerous foes of truth than lies, right? So popular science made in a bad way, as it is right now, I mean, pretty much all of it that we know about, I mean, everything that is actually popular, you know, is exactly that. It gives you convictions. It gives you an illusion of knowledge, a surrogate of knowledge. Whereas good popular science is, again, about talking about things you do understand, or at least you think you do, and making you understand, or realize rather, that you don't understand them, right? And I also really liked, like recently I watched one of the videos of proselytism, again, one of the modern Russian thinker, and he said that, I think he quoted someone else, but he didn't name the author, so I'm just giving you a quote of proselytism. So he said that popular science books are something in between fiction and scientific textbooks, at least in the aspect that they have the worst parts of both fiction and scientific textbook. In particular, they are as boring as a textbook, and they're also as wrong as fiction, as fantasy, you know. Alright, thank you for watching. The eons are closing.